And tonight we're going to be talking with the executive producers of an innovative and challenging and thought-provoking film called Orchestrating Change. And it's about a lot of things, and we're going to be talking about those things tonight. I'd like to introduce Marjorie Friedman. Could you just raise your hand? Which one's Marjorie? There we go. And Barbara Multer-Wellin.
Multer-Wellin, yes.
There we go. And they are the producers of this film. And as we get started tonight, we all know that one of the great feelings about film festivals is that bringing you ideas and thoughts and concepts that are not often discussed in popular culture or even in the media. And this film certainly exemplifies that. As a mental health professional, I found this film extremely important. I found it enlightening, I found it informative, and I found it thought-provoking. And working with patients for many years, this film has a statement that I believe everyone should have an opportunity to hear. And tonight, we're going to be talking to the people that created this film. And so, Marjorie and Barbara, welcome to the Friday Harbor Film Festival.
Thank you so much. We're so happy to be here.
Tell me, if you would, a little bit about why you made this film. Either one of you.
Barb, you want to start?
Sure. Well, you know, we had known each other for a long time and worked together on various TV projects. We had each done independent documentaries before. And for some crazy reason, we decided we wanted to do another project together. You know, independent documentaries are one of the toughest things to get done. And Margie happened to come across this incredible story. And the minute I heard it, which she will tell you, and the minute she told me about it, we're like, we have to make this film. It's important, and it's a topic that people just are still very, very loath to talk about. So, Margie, tell them how you found out about this.
I mean, it was really a complete accident. I had done another film about a men's prison choir that had also aired on PBS. And in the course of that, Caroline Whidden, who's the executive director of the Me Too Orchestra, was ordering a DVD. And in the course of that, she told me about what they were doing. And I was like, this is fantastic. You know, has anybody ever done a film about this? And she said, no, we've been approached, but, you know, I think you guys are the right people to do this. And we were just incredibly grateful to them to let us come and spend 2 years of time with them. We filmed for 2 years, and the musicians were really incredibly courageous in sharing their stories with us. But you know why it was important? Because we know that we all know people living with mental illness, you know, whether it's a friend, a family member, a colleague. And if you don't think you know someone, it's just because they haven't told you.
Yeah.
Because there's so much stigma around mental illness and mental health. And we just felt that this was a film that, in a much more palatable way than a lot of other films about mental illness, could really get a message across in a really lovely way while you listen to beautiful music.
Yeah. And I felt very much part of the sort of Me Too community, because I've dealt with depression on and off since I was a kid, and have been treated for it. And so I felt that it was, you know, my story, you know, that needed to be told.
Two things here I think are important. Number one, I don't think people realize, many people don't realize how long it takes to make a documentary film. This is not a commercial film that you see at the movies where they're on a schedule and they're wham and they're doing things and it's all wrapped up in 6 months of filming and then post-production goes to something. And no, this is a long time filming, and you become, you know, quite connected to the people that are involved. I'm sure that you each connected a lot to the people that you were filming. Am I right about that?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is, you know, when we first approached Ronald and Caroline, Ronald's the music director of Me Too Orchestra, when we first approached them, we said it's going to be 5 years, and they kind of, oh yeah. No, really, it's going to be 5 years. You know, and it was, and actually it turned out to be to our advantage, because, you know, a lot of that 5 years was spent raising the funds to finish the film. And that's why it took us 2 years of filming, but it worked to our advantage, because during those 2 years, much more of the story unfolded that never would have happened if we had shot this whole thing in 6 months. So it really was an advantage, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you have other projects in the work. We'll maybe talk about that a little bit later. But the other thing that I found important about this particular film is how relevant it is to people of a younger age who are also interested in music, who may have a feeling about maybe getting into music at whatever level, and that they may be playing music with people that are not necessarily or have diagnoses they don't even know about, or hidden or whatever. And it also deals with stigma, and I will talk about that in a minute because I think that's an important element in this as well. But I think there's a huge message here for people that are younger, and it's my hope that as many young people as possible in my community have an opportunity to see this film, because it really has a lasting impact, I would think, on anybody who has a consciousness about these kind of
It's
issues.
interesting. It's interesting because earlier we did a webinar with NAMI National, the National Association for Mental Illness, and one of the questions that came from the audience was a woman who said, I have a 20-year-old daughter who's just been diagnosed as bipolar, and she's having a really, really tough time coming to terms with the fact that she has been diagnosed. And, sort of once you're diagnosed, you're labeled, and once you're labeled, as you're judged. And I think young people particularly, and we see Marek's journey in our film, who also was diagnosed at like 20 years old, and also has really gone through a process of, having a tough time saying, this is my life now. And a lot of that is because of self-stigma and societal stigma. And to make it in any way easier for someone to say, okay, I have this diagnosis, but it's not the end of my life, and there are possibilities for me, I think is something we all hope for.
Well, as you point out, and as you demonstrate and illustrate in the film, that we use the word, bipolar disorder a lot. And, that's a highly generalized diagnosis, and it has many expressions and many ways of expressing itself in the population. And along with that come multiple dual diagnosis, tri-diagnosis. So there's a lot of factors here, and the public doesn't always know when they see someone exactly what they're experiencing. They may see something that's different, or this seems a little different than what I'm used to, and not know exactly what they're experiencing. And what you were able to do with this film, it seemed like, was be able to kind of really let people know that these diagnoses should not be defining in terms of their life experience, but also they're not real clear. And I have to admit that the profession that I'm in does not do a very good job of letting the public know about how to respond effectively to a diagnosis when they see it, without having some kind of guidance or information about it. And your film really hits that nail on the head about, well, let's back off for a minute and take a look at this and see about the ability versus the disability.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Dylan, one of the musicians we feature in the film, talks about the fact that the labels can really hurt. But one of the things he says that's so profound is he says, when he originally got his diagnosis of schizophrenia, he would tell people that he was a drug addict rather than mental illness, because they weren't afraid of that. There wasn't the stigma that unfortunately is just so prevalent, in our culture.
I think it's very telling about our culture that says that it's more acceptable to be a drug addict than it is to be a diagnosed schizophrenic. And it's not like anybody chooses schizophrenia. They don't raise your hand at birth and say, I'll be schizophrenic.
Of course.
It's not something anyone would choose. And so it's an unselected experience in life. And I thought there were many times in the film I was just laughing, because I thought, what a great statement that is, that you'd rather tell your family about a drug addiction than schizophrenia, which speaks to stigma. And the other question I had about that was, what do you see as the most important message of this film?
Oh, I think it's that. Go ahead, Barb.
I'm sorry. I think it's that, we are not our diagnoses. We're human beings, I really think that's it, that, you cannot just slap a label on someone. And all of the people that we talked to talked about the sort of salad of diagnoses that they've had over the years, I guess it's kind of an inexact science to figure out exactly how somebody should be categorized by the profession in order to help them and medicate them, certainly. But, when you're dealing person to person on a social level, you are not a schizophrenic. You are Dylan, you are Ronald, you are a
That's correct.
person. And that, I think, to me, is the main message. What would
Yeah,
you say,
and
Margie?
also about, I think that you can lead a perfectly wonderful life, that you are not your diagnosis, that you can be productive, you can be, part of society and part of your community, that you don't need to be shoved into a corner and stay there. And I think we need more organizations like this that are, well, it's a stigma-free zone. I mean, they literally put a sign on the door before you walk into rehearsal, you are entering a stigma-free zone.
Mhm.
And I think we need more organizations that are about inclusion and compassion and understanding.
Yeah.
Um,
And
I
I would
think
add,
they're a really great role. They're a great model, I think, for other organizations.
yeah.
You know, I,
Can I add
I
one
don't,
other thing, Gary? I just would want to say that I think there's a huge misunderstanding in society at large that once you're diagnosed as mentally ill, people think you're constantly 24 hours a day, that you're in a state of crisis. And people don't understand that it's not like that at all. You have periods of difficulty, right? I mean, you're the expert. You can speak to this better than I can. But, during those long, sometimes very long periods, life is life. You're not, it's not like Snake Pit, that old movie, where people are acting out in crazy. I cannot use that stigmatized word, but acting out in really extreme ways. That's not the reality. Is that correct?
when I began my clinical training many decades ago, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders was roughly a half of an inch thick. But the DSM-5 is Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders is now probably close to 3 inches thick.
Mm,
And I really don't believe that human experience has gotten that sicker in that many years.
Mm.
But we have certainly been able to successfully identify diagnoses that prior to 5, 10, 15, 25, 35 years ago simply didn't exist in its current form. We've gotten very good at telling people what they are. But
yeah.
there are over 300 known recognized treatments. Some of them work, some of them don't. Some of them, and therapists get to choose which treatment they use.
Mm,
And even medications have massively improved and changed over the years. So you talk about an inexact science, and I'm going to tell you that, boy, did you hit the nail on the head there. It is inexact, and we try our best, and we do what we can. And the many fine and wonderful therapists that we have in the country are doing a good job. But one of the challenges we have is still dealing with the concept of getting people into treatment because of the stigma. This
sure.
film helps alleviate that in a way that people like me can't really talk to people into treatment, but a film like this can change people's mind. And that's just a marvelous gift to the people who see this movie.
We certainly hope so.
Yeah, I mean, we feel it's inspiring and empowering. I think hopefully
Yeah,
people watching it will go, well, gosh, if this person can talk about it like
Yeah.
this, maybe I can too. We
yeah,
hope that maybe a little bit of that courage will kind of rub off,
that's correct.
and make people feel a little bit more comfortable talking about it in general. That's why we love having these kinds of discussions, because we're hoping that it will do that. It will achieve that. It'll get people talking and feel more comfortable talking about it.
Yeah.
There's a broader brush too about inclusivity. And I think that you demonstrate that half of the orchestra have mental illness and half do not. And what
Mm,
you demonstrate there in a very passive, soft way is that there are people here that are diagnosable that have very challenging mental disorders working complementary, and
yeah.
pardon the pun here, in symphony with people that are not diagnosed yet,
Mm,
or have maybe have been diagnosed and have recovered, or whatever the case may be, but they're working together.
Yeah.
And I think that synergy of working together is in my view, a powerful message of the film as well.
It's a very powerful message. And the other thing is just visually, at the end of the film, there's this wonderful concert with all the
Yeah.
musicians on stage. And I think what's also great is when you look at them, you can't tell. You don't know which musician is living with a mental illness, which is not. And that's the point.
Yeah.
The point is they look like your neighbor because they are, and I think that's the point, is to take away what, sometimes the media portrays as kind of this, wild, as Barbara said, crazy person, these are people who have jobs, they have families. They just happen to have a diagnosis of mental illness. And, some of them more extreme than others. Some of them have, as Barbara said, go in and out of cycles of having issues, but not all the time. Not all the time. And they're able to perform this wonderful music together. And the orchestras have really changed their lives.
Mm-hmm. I've worked with many professionals in the mental health field that have had diagnoses of their own throughout their life. Some of that sourced in trauma, some of it sourced in DNA, some of it sourced in addictions. I will say that in most of the cases, the people that have recovered and stayed in mental health treatment as a provider had a perception of the disease process and the treatment process that those of us who have not been diagnosed or did not identify in that way do not. And so there's a great teaching element to this film in that as well. It says, hey, what is behind this curtain that we've artificially put up, and what's keeping us from connecting to people in ways that we would like to connect and somehow have failed to do so. And that I think the film encourages people to look at themselves, look inward here a little bit, rather than just always looking outward and saying, well, what's comfortable to be around.
The stigma is so deep. This isn't in the film, but at one point, Ronald, the conductor and the music director of Me Too Orchestra, said to us that, Ronald has been diagnosed as bipolar. Dylan, as we were just talking about, the bass player, has been diagnosed as schizophrenic. And when they first got to know each other, Ronald has disclosed to us that he was kind of a little worried about Dylan because he was schizophrenic, and then he realized that he was practicing the same, kind of prejudice and stigmatizing Dylan in the same way that he felt that knew that he had been stigmatized. So it's that deep, even in the community, people can practice that on each other without even being conscious of it at first. We're so internalized, all of this stuff. We see it so much in the media.
That's the counter that this film produces. This film produces a counter argument or a counter set of information about this whole process of diagnosis and treatment and the persistency of mental illness in the community and the problems with stigma. I mean, we've talked about stigma in mental health as providers and how that's a barrier to treatment for decades without really any central focus on how we're going to deal with that. We're pretty busy doing the treatment, and diagnosis is something that we do partly because of it's an artifact of the insurance process. It's an artifact of the communication process between providers. But diagnosis isn't really too useful when you're trying to provide a treatment, other than initially. You kind of have a general direction on where to go. But the treatment process has to be individualized. And as you showed in your film very powerfully, that the disease, even bipolar disorder, presents itself in the population with these individuals quite differently. It's not like, well, we're all have the sniffles here and everybody has a runny nose. It presents differently. That's a great message for people to get, I think, in my perspective. I don't know if you intended that, but it certainly comes into the film.
Well, we very much made a decision in the beginning to let the musicians tell their own stories in their own words. So, it really was just from them sharing their stories and their own personal situations that message came across.
Right. And that there are no experts, so to speak, in the film.
Right.
Not to, throw shade on anybody, but,
I've been introduced in speaking engagements as experts. And one of the first things I say when I get to the podium is I'm not an expert, because there really aren't any. And what we have is observers. And I'm an observer to a process. And I might have some intervention ideas, but I'm not an expert. And I'm never going to be an expert. But I was really taken by the fact that Alana and Carol and Dylan and Corey and Merrick and and Sandy and Eric and Carolyn, who is clearly a hero to me for
Hmm.
what she took on. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
my life.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
You know, but my
Angel in
point
the
is,
house. Yeah.
each one of those expressed something very differently, and they presented differently. And if they were all presenting to the same provider, there might even be different diagnoses. So that's how imprecise this whole process is, and your film demonstrates that. Let me ask, what do you think the greatest challenge was in creating this film, or directing it, or producing it?
Raising the money, and then raising the money.
Yeah,
Because they
it's
were,
always about the Benjamins.
It really
you
is.
know, in documentary, independent documentary, it always is, because we really couldn't have had better partners than we did with Me Too and the musicians. You know, there were never any issues in that regard. You know, they really, and again, Margie was talking about having to spend so much time, but because we really did get to know them, and we really weren't just, you know, sort of a news crew buzzing by with cameras. You know, we were someone who was involved in their lives for 2 years, and it continues, because we're still in touch with a lot of them.
Yeah.
So, you know, it was really more about the financial aspect of it than anything else.
I don't think that people realize necessarily, and it seems to me that this is the case, and you can tell me whether it is or not, but you really develop a relationship with these people. I mean,
Absolutely. Yeah.
2 years. I mean, come
Yeah,
on. I mean,
Absolutely. Yeah.
And what was
Yeah.
interesting is that, you know, well, not interesting. It was actually terrific. You know, as the stories evolved, and we learned about certain situations with Merrick and Dylan, and Caroline had called us and told us about them, and we said to her, well, can we include those? And she said, that's why I'm telling you. You know, we could have very easily done a fluff film about a unique orchestra, but we really wanted it to have much more depth and challenge. And when people see it, you know, there are times when you're going to laugh, you know, because there are things in it that are funny. There are times when you may want to go grab a Kleenex because they're touching and sad. But we really wanted it to run the gamut of the experience. And it's really to the credit to all the musicians that they allowed us to do that.
Yeah.
And I think over time, obviously, there was a trust that developed. They got to know us, and you know how and we were also very, very conscious of you know, how we dealt with them, and not to exploit them, and not to exploit the story, which I hope we didn't. I don't think we did. They're very happy with it. So, you know, all those things we had to be aware of as well.
You know, I want to say something too about the use of animation in the film, because I think that was a big part of it as well. You know, we both live in California, and this orchestra was in Vermont and Boston, so it was difficult to, you know, be someplace on the spot. But even if we could have, you know, taken a drive over when someone was having, you know, a mental health crisis, we had long conversations about, you know, we don't want to be the kind of filmmakers who stick a camera in someone's face when they're that vulnerable and possibly even unaware of what's going on. So the solution that we came up with was and we were very lucky to get these really wonderful animators, the Satrin sisters, and we sent them clips from our interviews, and, you know, that we felt were the essence of people talking about what was really happening to them in these moments. And they came up with these wonderful images that we hope really help people understand what it's like to be in the grips of something like that, you know, without violating, you know, the trust and our relationship with the people themselves.
And at the end of the film, you do talk a little bit. There's some narrative about what's going on in their lives, because when you go through the movie, you're wondering, you know, what's going to happen, and it's because these are real people. This isn't a drama. This is real life, and these are real individuals with real lives that they're living. And so you've drawn in my view, you drew me in, and I wanted to know that these people were going to be okay. I really wanted to know that. And so I hope people see the film and are drawn in that same way, because I think that says a lot about what you were able to do with the film. If you're drawing people into the individuals that are being illustrated in the film, and you want to know what's going forward.
Yeah, and we wanted people to root for them. You know, we wanted the audience to root for them. You know, And the other thing we really hoped is that the audience, not just the people who go to their concerts, but obviously the people who see the film, that it will really challenge their perceptions and misconceptions about people living with mental illness. You know, we hope they'll walk away from this film going, oh, well, wow, I really learned something, or I have a really different sense of what it means to live with a mental illness.
And that's very important, because that's why I want youth, I want people that are adolescents to see this movie, so that they get that early in their life. You know, it's great that when we're older folks, you know, geezers like me that can see this and experience it. But you know, but wouldn't it be great if you have a more inclusive perspective at age 20 than you know, you can't get the destigmatizing information any earlier than possible. I mean, it's really important to get it early in your life, and when you encounter it in your life, which most people will at some point encounter someone with mental illness on the street or in their family or in themselves. And I think then you're more prepared. You're preparing them for a way to respond in a therapeutic as well as a humane way.
And
Amazing.
I hope that, you know, if someone's having a rough time and maybe would see this, you know, maybe it would make it just that a little bit easier to, you know, make that call or reach out somehow for help. Because the help is there. I mean, that's the sad part in a way, because, you know, treatment and medication really does help. You really can improve your life. And I think that's a point that this film makes as well. You know, if you're able to make that gesture, it'll really be worth it, you know.
One last question. Is there anything that you left out of the film that you would have liked to include? Have included?
I don't think
You're both
so.
laughing, so there must be something.
No, I mean, there wasn't a lot left on the cutting room floor. I mean, I quite honestly,
there was a scene of Marek, who also was a rapper.
not because he wasn't good. It just
no, I wasn't sorry that it was there. I mean, I was very fond of it because I'm very fond of Marek, and you know, this is his other love. He's probably the only clarinet rapper, you know, hip hop clarinetist in the country. But no, the film does not suffer for its lack.
Yeah, we just couldn't, you know, at a certain point, you just have to go, this is how much time it has to be, and it needs to be locked at this time, and you know, we just couldn't fit it all in. So,
you know, we've all seen movies where at the very end, as they're running the credits, they do a little of the outtakes, the screw ups and the takes and stuff like that. But you know, you couldn't put everything in, I'm sure.
No.
But you look at a film and you say, well, I guess I can improve it. But it's really good. And so anybody listening to this tonight, if they haven't seen the film, I highly encourage them to see this, because this is a wonderful film about an important and relevant topic today that we're talking about, not only in the United States, but around the world, but especially in our community of Friday Harbor, the Salmon Islands, the Pacific Northwest. It's an important element to be aware of.
Can we mention how people might be able to see the film? Can we talk about that?
Well, it's part of their festival. It's part of their
after the festival. Yes.
Certainly there are multiple ways that I'm not even aware of how people can access this film. We live in a small community, so word of mouth will be very important. People will get information about that. They will access the films. The film will be talked about with individuals. There will be multiple access portals, if I'm correct about that. There's access portals about ways to get the film now as well as in the future.
Right. And if anybody has any questions, they can go to our website, which is www.orchestratingchangethefilm.com.
Okay.
Thank you.
And someone just asked if the recording will be available on demand viewing immediately following this live broadcast, and it will be. So people will be able to do that. And I think something was just put up about how to access the film. Am I correct about that? Yes, I am. Good. So that's great. And what part of California do you live in?
I'm in North Hollywood.
I'm in Santa Monica.
Okay. Well, not too far from here.
No.
Invite you to the Pacific Northwest whenever you're here. We'd love to meet you and see you and show you our film office.
Well, you live in a beautiful part of the country. So
we have friends who just moved up to Lopez Island. Is that not too far from you? Yeah.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
flat island. We
Is that
call
what
it.
they call it?
It's the
That's great.
flattest of the islands. Yeah. That's very good. Well, we're
Yeah.
welcome anytime. We'd love to see you and talk
Thank
with you more
you.
about your films.
Thank you
There
so
is
much.
one quick last question. Are you involved in any future films, or what your next project will be?
Well, we're still working on this one. You know,
Okay.
a couple of things in the hopper, but I don't know that it's ready for
Okay.
ready to discuss yet. We're still in the R&D phase. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Well, we want to
Thank you
wish you the
for asking.
best on that and the best fortunes with your new projects and activities. And we want to thank you again for allowing the Friday Harbor Film Festival to host this film to our community and to the world. And again, congratulations on a very, very important documentary that we hope as many people as possible can see, which will help change the lives of those who see it.
Thank you
so
so
much.
much. We're
Right.
just delighted to be here. So thank you.
Yeah.
We really, really appreciate it.
All
Great
right.
conversation. Really terrific.
Well, take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.